No No Nanette is, among other things, a huge milestone in terms of promotion. It's certainly a successful piece when you think about the way it was packaged, the way it was advertised, and the way it was presented. And as I said in the previous unit, it's not exactly deep. It's kind of a silly, frothy piece. It's set largely in an old-fashioned version of Atlantic City, certainly pre-casino Atlantic City, more folks strolling on the boardwalk in boater hats and eating taffy. Atlantic City. It was definitely a comedy, and it was based on a play called My Lady Friends from 1919. It toured originally, and it was not a huge success originally. As it first came out in 1924, audiences were not bowled over by it. And I guess in this respect, here's a place where we can say that Harry Frazee may have known what he was doing about some things, because when Frazee came on board as a producer and said, I'm going to invest my money in this, he also started to attend rehearsals. And some of the things that he suggested was that it needed new stars, that the script was too confusing, and he asked to have additional songs written for the show. The songs that he demanded were called Tea for Two and I Want to Be Happy. And if there are any songs in No No Nanette that people recognize and know and can name, probably those are the only two songs that people remember from that show, particularly Tea for Two. Tea for Two was an immense hit in the 1920s. It was certainly a tap dancing standard. Anybody who's taken a basic tap dancing class and has that sort of, it has an ideal sort of structure for that. And connected to our module, you're going to see some of the original cast, the 1971 cast as well. One version of Tea for Two, and I've included two versions of I Want to Be Happy. Nanette is an immense tap show, as many of the shows from the 1930s were. A lot of tap dancing that's kind of designed to kind of fill the gaps between, between holes in the plot. There'd be giant breaks where we'd just have a giant 8 o'clock number and everybody would come out and tap dance. Tea for Two in particular is a song that almost became a cliche. It was so popular and so overplayed that most people, it became almost a joke. You'd hear the opening, dun, 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 and people go, oh, not that song, that sort of thing. Frazee made a pile of money as well on the show. The London production in 1925 was a huge success, and it ran for over 600 performances. The touring production went throughout the United States, and then also ran throughout Europe. The musical was translated into a bunch of different languages. It enjoyed a lot of regional productions, and Frazee was one of the first people to recognize the value of charging other regional theaters small amounts of money so that they could produce their own versions of his show. It became a film adaptation in 1940, and then the adaptation of the film was retitled Tea for Two because people were just so gaga about that song that they thought that would make it a more recognizable piece. The show is about a man. Well, Nanette is this man's daughter, and the idea of no is that she just doesn't take no for an answer because she's spoiled and he's too good to her and all this sort of thing. And the main character is really the father, and the father is a Bible salesman, and he goes from town to town selling Bibles. And in 3 different towns, he has met up with these women who have told him tales about how they are so financially destitute and how they have all these problems, and he offers them money to help them out of their problems. And then through a series of misunderstandings and the women not being a little bit shady and willing to blackmail him, it sort of looks like, oh no, people will think I'm, being unfaithful and I have all these women all over the country and I don't really, I'm just a nice guy who just shares my money. Between that and the daughter wanting to marry this young man and some complications that occur there with class and with somebody being the right person for each other. An interesting story I'll tell you that's brief but very local is I had always maintained that because of the strange relationship between the Boston Red Sox and this play, and because our own campus, Emmanuel, is probably the closest physically a person can stage any kind of play to Fenway Park, distance-wise, maybe, I had always said, well, if the Red Sox ever win the World Series, we'll do a production of No No Nanette. And in 2003, as some of you may have noted, the Red Sox almost won the World Series, and due to leaving pitcher Pedro Martinez in a little bit too long and some other ridiculous things, I was so convinced, I said, I'm going to have to do this production, that I ordered a box of the scripts, and I sat in my living room with the scripts and watched that slip away and had to sludge in the snow and bring them back to the post office and do the show that was originally scheduled after all. And I said, that's it, from now on, I'm not ordering the scripts for No No Nanette unless I see 100% that this has happened. Of course, the very next year it did happen, and I did produce No No Nanette here, and strangely, up until we did another show, Spamalot, just a couple years ago, No No Nanette was our biggest selling production in my time here at Emmanuel. No show was attended by a larger audience than No No Nanette, and we sent a little note over to the folks at Fenway Park that we were doing it. We got a very nice little letter back, encouraging us. It was wonderful of them to do that. And we did produce that show. We played it for laughs. It was kind of strange. People really didn't know quite what to make of it, but it was a success. And speaking of playing it for laughs, and this will bring us back to something more factual for you, in 1971, No No Nanette was revived on Broadway, and it was played for laughs. It was played as a very campy, very nostalgic show. Bert Shevelove, the man who would also write A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, kind of took the script and tweaked it quite a bit from the 1925 original. In 1925, No No Nanette was considered a very racy, kind of shockingly adult content kind of show. But by the time 1971 came around, it was considered so square and so old-fashioned and so silly that the only thing you could really do with it was play it for laughs. Nonetheless, Tommy Tune, same choreographer we talked about last week. Tommy Tune, who had choreographed Crazy for You out of some old Gershwin pieces, and who would later choreograph Day in Hollywood and Night in Ukraine in 1980, received a Tony Award nomination for working on No No Nanette as well. It has been claimed, as I said, that this show is responsible for the curse of the Bambino, but I don't think it's as direct as that. I do think that Mr. Frazie's overall business dealings made it very difficult for the Red Sox to succeed, and they also made it very easy for a show like Nanette to succeed. Posters, billboards, advertisements, newspaper advertisements taken out by Frazie and others long before Nanette would open was, nowadays that's kind of par for the course. That's done a lot. But in the day, taking out that kind of material and advertising that heavily certainly helped pack the house in the earliest days of its 1925 run and turned it into a success. Vincent Yeoman's never really matched this success either. Frazie didn't always bankroll his shows. Yeoman's pieces before Frazie, forgettable, kind of okay. People know a few songs from them. Yeoman's material after Frazie, also kind of average and not particularly strong. Yeoman's himself would pass away due to tuberculosis in a sanitarium in Colorado. Not a sanitarium in the sense of, certainly not a mental institution, but a place that was designed for its germ-free environment. Not terribly successful at keeping him alive, nonetheless. One of the weirder things that Vincent Yeoman's put a little bit of his money into right towards the end of his life was in 1943. He put together a show called The Vincent Yeoman's Ballet Revue. And it tried to do a couple things. It tried to incorporate some Latin American music, and it tried to incorporate ballet, but those aren't the most significant things. It also involved much larger than life, roughly 7 to 10 foot high, wooden marionettes of human figures doing ballet. And he also had felt that it might appeal to children and offered a children's seating section towards the front. So little children could sit right in the front row for a 10-foot faceless wooden dancing marionette. And that wasn't a success. That did not do so well. People were kind of baffled by it. They thought it was a little arty, a little pretentious, and not more than a little frightening. And it lost a bunch of money for Vince Yeomans. He's also, of course, I don't want to sell him completely short, because, he's in several Songwriters Halls of Fame, and he's written a number of successful songs, and you'd find them out, if I'm probably not going to have us do one of our let's find a song by this composer with this particular composer here discussions, but if you were to do that, I think you'd find songs. It's just that they'd be very obscure. Nonetheless, he was respected in his era, to the point where our next top artist, Cole Porter, who was famous for dropping names in the middle of some of his songs. He would mention people who were alive at the same time he was in the lyrics, and at one point he mentions Vincent Youmans, and finds a way to rhyme humans with humans, Humans, and discusses him as being some high-cultured person who might have a strict threshold for what counts music quality. As a composer, we kind of look at Yeomans as kind of one of those folks that was putting in his time, his Tin Pan Alley time, his Broadway time. He never quite rises to the standards of a Gershwin, although his shows are structured very similarly. They have the tap dancing breaks, they have the big orchestral maneuver arrangements, they have the kind of lighter material hiding some very lovely ballads. But I think it's this Curse of the Bambino story that makes him stand out and makes him significant. Well, that is today. The next time we get together, I guess in the virtual sense, we'll be talking about Cole Porter, perhaps the greatest American lyricist. And really, this is a story that a lot of folks tell me when I get course evaluations and such, that they find this was one of the more interesting biographies and one of the more interesting stories that we tell of a person in this history. So I hope you enjoy that. And thanks for joining us here, and there'll be a new module out next time with Cole Porter. Thanks, man.